I never thought I'd be the kind of man who had to outsmart his own flesh and blood. You spend decades building a life, a home, and a legacy, only to realize that the person you die for is the same person counting the days until you do. When I walked through those heavy oak doors that Tuesday morning, the air in the courtroom felt thin, like it was being sucked out by the weight of 1,000 lies. My son Thomas stared at his shoes, unable to face the man who'd carried him on his shoulders. But his wife, Vanessa, she had a look on her face that wasn't a smile. It was the look of someone who had already spent the money in my bank account. I knew then that 64 years of memories were being erased by a debt-ridden couple who thought I was too old to notice. My name is William Ashford. I'm 72 now, but until last year, most people took me for a man in his early 60s. I'm a man of habit, discipline, and sawdust. After my wife, Margaret, passed away 5 years ago from pancreatic cancer, the silence of our home in Vancouver became a physical presence. It sat in her favorite armchair. It hovered over the empty side of the bed. I didn't let that grief hollow me out, though. I made a pact with her memory. I walked 5 kilometers every morning around the seawall, watching the fog lift off the Pacific. I volunteered at the community center, teaching other seniors how to navigate the digital world they feared. But mostly, I spent my time in the basement. In woodworking, you learn quickly that the most beautiful grain often hides beneath a rough, weathered exterior. You learn that if you apply too much pressure too quickly, the wood will splinter. To build something that lasts, you need patience, a sharp eye, and the right tools. I spent my afternoons turning blocks of walnut and cherry into something useful. I built birdhouses, picture frames, and jewelry boxes, not because I needed them, but because a man without a craft is a man who starts to fade. I didn't realize then that I was practicing for the most important project of my life. I didn't realize that my life, the reconstruction of my own freedom. Thomas was our only child. Margaret and I poured every ounce of our love and our savings into him. We were the yes parents, private schools at St. George's, elite hockey camps every summer, a brand new car the day he got his license. When he wanted his MBA at UBC, I wrote the check without blinking. When he started that tech firm, Nexus Stream, that eventually folded, I co-signed the loan and then quietly paid off the $150,000 debt so his credit wouldn't suffer. You've always been there for me, Dad, he told me at the cemetery while we buried his mother. He gripped my shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. I felt a surge of pride that day, even through my tears. I thought I had raised a man of character, a man who understood the value of loyalty. I didn't realize I had raised a man who saw his father as a safety net that never stopped catching him until he decided he wanted to cut the net and sell the rope. The trap was set on a Tuesday in October. I was in the garage, the scent of cypress wood filling the air, lost in the rhythm of the sander. My phone buzzed on the workbench. It was Thomas. Dad, Vanessa and I have been talking. We're worried, he said. His voice had that jagged, frantic edge it got when he was drowning in stress. You're 72, living alone in that massive house. What if you fall? What if your heart gives out and no one finds you for days? We can't sleep at night thinking about it. I told him I was fine, that Mrs. Chun next door checked on me every morning, but they wouldn't hear it. They talked about family unity and honoring Mom's memory. They wanted to move in. They wanted to protect me. In the quiet of that big, empty house, I let my guard down. I wanted to believe my son wanted to spend time with me. I invited the wolves home thinking they were my pack. I should have listened to the silence between their words. From the moment they arrived in a rented SUV packed with 3 massive suitcases, the atmosphere shifted. Vanessa's hugs were performative, as stiff as a board. Thomas couldn't hold a gaze for more than a second. He looked at the crown molding of the house, the hardwood floors, and the antique furniture, not as memories, but as appraisals. I tried to bridge the gap with food, making my grandmother's shepherd's pie, but the dining table felt like a battlefield. "So, Thomas, how is the new position at the firm?" I asked, trying to spark the old warmth. He exchanged a glance with Vanessa. "It's single quotes, S. Fine, Dad. A lot of pressure. The market is shifting." "And Vanessa, the insurance work?" "I'm actually taking a sabbatical," she said, her voice smooth but cold. "To help you get organized. This house is so cluttered, William. All these old books and Margaret's clothes. It's not healthy to live in the past." Every question I asked was met with a vague answer. Every story I told was met with a patronizing nod or an eye roll. They treated me like a child at my own table. But the real story began at 2:47 a.m. a week later. I woke up thirsty and headed downstairs for a glass of water. I heard the low, urgent whispering coming from the kitchen. I pulled on my robe and grabbed a small digital recorder I kept in my pocket for woodworking notes. I crept to the top of the stairs like a ghost in my own home. "We have to be patient, Vanessa," Thomas was saying, his voice a low hiss. "Patient? The bank is calling every day, Thomas. We're $22,000 deep on the visa, and the Richmond condo mortgage hasn't been touched in 6 months. We're going to lose everything while he sits on $3 million of equity in this drafty old tomb." I know, Thomas whispered. "But the doctor said we need documentation. His age, the forgetting, we just need to show a pattern, early cognitive decline. We get the medical power of attorney, we sell this place, and we move him to a facility where he's safe. Then we can finally breathe." I stood there in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't forgotten anything. I'd called Thomas on his birthday, given him my father's vintage watch, and we'd had lunch at the harbor just 3 weeks prior. But they were rewriting my history to fit their narrative of my decay. They weren't moving in to save me. They were moving in to harvest me. The next morning, I caught Vanessa in my study. She was hunched over my laptop, her eyes darting across my bank statements and property records. When she saw me, she slammed the lid shut with a fake wide-eyed smile. "Just checking my email, William. This old computer is so slow. You really should let us get you an iPad. It's much simpler for ... people your age." I smiled back, the kind of smile you give a predator when you know exactly where the trap is hidden. From that moment on, I became an actor. I gave them exactly what they wanted to see. In woodworking, if you want to find a hidden crack, you apply a little stress. I decided to apply the stress of their own expectations. I'd forget my keys in the vegetable crisper. I'd ask Vanessa the same question 3 times in an hour. I'd let my gaze go vacant during dinner, staring at a spot on the wall until Thomas cleared his throat. I watched the hope bloom in their eyes, a sick, twisted hope that their father was disappearing. 2 days later, I drove downtown under the guise of getting my eyes checked. Instead, I went to see David Chen. David had been my lawyer for 30 years. He was a man who understood that in law, as in woodworking, the joints must be tight and the foundation must be level. I sat in his high-rise office, the Vancouver skyline looking indifferent to my heartbreak. "David," I said, leaning across his mahogany desk, "my son is trying to bury me while I'm still breathing. I need you to help me build a vault." I played the recording from the staircase. David's face turned into a mask of stone. "William, what they're doing is financial grooming. It's elder abuse. If we go to the police now, they'll claim it's a family misunderstanding. We need to let them commit to the fraud. We need to wait until they file that court application. That's when the trap snaps shut. We spent 4 hours that day. We drafted a new power of attorney that named a professional trust as my guardian rendering. Thomas's attempts legally useless, even if they won. We updated the will to include a clause. Any attempt to contest my competency would result in an immediate forfeiture of all inheritance. But most importantly, we set up the surveillance. David suggested the cameras that looked like smoke detectors. "They'll think they're watching you," David said, "but we're going to be the ones with the front row seats to their greed." Chapter 5. The season of shadows, the month of November, was a masterpiece of psychological theater. In woodworking, there is a technique called distressing, where you intentionally mar the surface of a new piece of wood to make it look old, fragile, and weathered. That is exactly what I did to myself. I began a campaign of calculated vulnerability, turning my own home into a stage where I played the lead role in a tragedy of my own, making Vanessa was the primary antagonist in this quiet war. While Thomas still carried a lingering, heavy guilt that made him avoid my eyes, Vanessa was emboldened. She saw my decline not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity that was finally ripening. She began what I called the gaslighting phase. It started with a salt shaker. One evening, as we sat down to a dinner of roasted chicken, I reached for the salt. It wasn't there. I checked the cabinet, the counter, the sideboard. "Looking for something, William?" Vanessa asked, her voice dripping with a practiced, sugary concern. "The salt, Vanessa?" "It was right here this morning." She sighed, a long, weary sound designed to make me feel like a burden. "William, you threw it away. Don't you remember? You said it was empty, even though it was full." "I had to fish it out of the trash. I put it in the pantry so you wouldn't do it again." I knew for a fact the salt was in her kitchen drawer. I had seen her hide it through the reflection of the microwave door. But I didn't argue. I let my shoulders slump. I let my lip tremble just a fraction. "Oh, I don't recall that." My mind must have been on the woodworking. "It's okay," she whispered, patting my hand. "That's why we're here. To remember for you." But while she was hiding the salt, I was hiding the truth. Every time she gaslit me, I recorded the date and time in a small ledger I kept hidden behind the insulation in the garage. I wasn't losing my mind. I was building a dossier. The psychological battle intensified during the second week of November. Vanessa began pruning the house. She started with Margaret's garden. One afternoon, I came home from my walk to find her standing over a pile of uprooted rose bushes, the ones Margaret had planted the year we moved in. "What are you doing?" I asked, the anger flaring in my chest like a hot coal. Vanessa didn't even look up from her shears. "They were dying, William. Covered in aphids. You hadn't noticed, of course. You've been letting the yard go. We're going to put in some low-maintenance gravel. It's better for the resale value. I mean, for your safety, less tripping hazards." The roses were perfectly healthy. I had fed them myself just 2 days prior. That night, I sat in the garage and wept for the roses, but I also used that pain to sharpen my resolve. I realized then that Vanessa wasn't just after the money. She wanted to erase the man I was so that the patient would be easier to manage. Decided to strike back with a senior moment that would seal their fate. On a rainy Thursday, I invited them into the study. I have laid out a series of old bank ledgers from my firm documents that were 20 years out of date and completely worthless. "Thomas, Vanessa," I said, rubbing my temples as if I were in pain. "I'm having trouble with the accounts. The numbers ... They seem to be moving. I think the bank is stealing from me." Vanessa's eyes lit up like a predator sensing a kill. She moved toward the desk with a predatory grace. "Let me see, William. I have a background in insurance, remember? I can help you consolidate these. Maybe we should move the funds into a joint account, just to keep the thieves away." I watched her hands shake with excitement as she flipped through the old ledgers. She thought she was looking at my current liquid assets. In reality, she was looking at the ghost of a business I had liquidated a decade ago. Yes, I whimpered. Please, I just want it to be simple. That night, the smoke detector cameras captured them in the kitchen, drinking wine and laughing. He's a vegetable, Thomas, Vanessa laughed. He literally handed me the books. We don't even need to. Wait for the hearing. We can start the transfer paperwork tomorrow. We should wait for the legal power of attorney, Thomas cautioned, though his voice lacked conviction. Why? She snapped. He's begging for help. We're just giving it to him. The third week was the most difficult. This was when they brought in Dr. Morrison to prepare. I spent the morning of the appointment depriving myself of sleep and reading confusing, contradictory philosophy texts to defog my brain. When the doctor arrived, I played the part of the distracted, grieving widower to perfection. I answered his questions with long pauses. I forgot the name of the current prime minister, substituting him for a man who had been dead for 10 years, Vanessa. Stood in the corner, nodding solemnly at every mistake I made. He's been like this for months, doctor, she lied. He gets lost in his own workshop. We had to take the keys to the table, saw away because we were afraid he'd lose a hand. That was the biggest lie of all. I had the keys in my pocket the whole time, but I let Dr. Morrison write his notes. I let him sign the preliminary assessment of cognitive impairment, stage 3. The final week of November was the silent week. I stopped speaking almost entirely. I wanted to see how far they would go if they thought I had truly checked out. It was a terrifying experiment. I watched Vanessa start to label the furniture with masking tape. Sell, keep, donate. She put a sell tag on Margaret's piano. She put a donate tag on my collection of first edition books. She treated me like a ghost haunting my own. Hallways. She would talk about me while I was sitting right in front of her. We'll use the master bedroom for the staging, she told Thomas while I sat 3 feet away eating my oatmeal. We can move him into the small guest room upstairs. It'll be easier to keep him confined there until the Oakhaven spot opens up. He's right there, Vanessa, Thomas whispered, looking at me with a flicker of horror. He's not there, Thomas. Look at him. He's staring at a spoon. He's gone. I wasn't staring at a spoon. I was staring at the reflection in the spoon, watching her greed consume her. I was counting the days until the hearing. I was a man building a cedar chest, and the last thing you do before you finish is sand the surface until it's perfectly smooth, hiding all the joints so that no one can see how the box is put together. By the end of November, they were convinced they had won. They had the doctor's note, they had the pattern of behavior, and they had my silence. They had even started looking at luxury condos in West Vancouver for themselves, using my home as their down payment. But as I sat in my workshop on the final night of the month, running my hand over the cool, hard surface of the walnut desk I was finishing, I knew the truth. I had given them enough rope to hang their reputations. They thought they were the ones distressing the wood, making it look old and broken. But I was the one who had chosen the grain. I was the one who had set the glue. And tomorrow, in that courtroom, the clamps were coming off. The night before the hearing, Thomas came to my room. He sat on the edge of the bed and told me he loved me. He told me that tomorrow would be a big day for my health and that he'd be there to take the burden off my shoulders. I looked at him. I looked at the lines around his eyes, the stress that he'd brought upon himself through greed. I saw the ghost of the 8-year-old who cried when he scraped his knee. I hugged him back, memorizing the scent of my son, mourning the man he could have been. He thought he was comforting a confused old man. He had no idea he was hugging a man who had already signed his eviction papers. I know you think you're doing the right thing, Thomas, I whispered, I am, Dad. Trust me. The courthouse was a monument of glass and steel, cold and impersonal. When we entered, Thomas and Vanessa sat with their lawyer, a shark-like woman in a burgundy suit. They presented a report from Dr. Morrison, a doctor they had coached, a doctor who had seen my staged confusion and written a damning assessment. The lawyer painted a picture of a flickering candle about to go out. She talked about the risks of independent living and my declining cognitive state. Justice Mackenzie, a woman who looked like she'd seen every trick in the book, listened intently. Then she turned to me. Mr. Ashford, do you have anything to say? I stood up. I didn't lean on the table. I didn't shake. I adjusted my tie, the one Margaret bought me, and looked the judge in the eye. Your Honor, my son believes I am equity to be liquidated. He thinks my age has made me blind. He thinks that because I am 72, I am no longer the architect of my own life. He is wrong. And I would like my counsel, Mr. Chun, to show you exactly how wrong he is. For the next hour, the courtroom became a theater of truth. David Chun played the videos of my medical assessments. He showed the footage of Vanessa raiding my desk, and then the Uzo played. The entire room heard Vanessa talk about Oak Haven and accelerating the timeline. They heard Thomas agree to dump me in a facility to pay off a credit card. I watched Thomas crumble. I watched the moment the realization hit him. His Sizamel father had been the smartest person in the room all along. He hadn't been taking care of me. I had been documenting him. The judge didn't just deny their request. She looked at them with a disgust that felt like a physical weight. This application is a work of fiction and a betrayal of the highest order. She said, I am referring this matter to the authorities for a full investigation into fraud and elder abuse. I walked out of that building into the Vancouver rain, breathing in the air of a free man. I drove home alone. When I pulled into the driveway, a locksmith was already there. David had coordinated everything. By the time Thomas and Vanessa arrived in their SUV, the locks were changed. I stood on the porch, the rain falling around me. Like a curtain. Dad, please. Thomas shouted, his face red and tear-streaked. We have nowhere to go. We sold the condo to pay the legal fees. You had a home here, I said, my voice as cold as a winter morning. You had a father, but you chose to see a bank account instead. Your boxes are on the porch. Don't come back. 3 months have passed now. The house is quiet, but it's a peaceful quiet. I still walk my 5 kilometers. I still work in my shop. I'm currently working on a cedar chest for my granddaughter. Cedar is a funny wood. It smells sweet, but it's incredibly resistant to rot and insects. It's durable. It lasts. People ask me if I regret destroying my relationship with my son. I tell them that I didn't destroy it. I just refuse to let him destroy me. The moral of this story isn't that you should fear the young. It's that you should never ever underestimate the man who spent 40 years learning how to build things to last. Love is honest. Love is a knock on the door saying, Dad, I'm in trouble. Anything else is just a heist. I am William Ashford. I am 72 years old. I am sharp, I am capable, and I am exactly where I belong. I'm not going gentle. I'm not going at all.